Did you guys know that Minecraft has a China edition? Wild, right? So everything from Minecraft China edition started all the way back in 2016. NetEase secured publishing rights for mainland China, and eventually it would see a release in 2017, but the Chinese edition of Minecraft is a little bit different and worth talking about here. You see, first of all, if you were playing Chinese Minecraft, it's free to download and play. You don't have to buy Minecraft for the price that it's currently listed at. I always felt like Minecraft was like slightly more expensive than what I would have expected it to be. Not in China. It's free, but you do have to have a NetEase account and a Chinese national ID and IP verification. Yeah, to make an account, you have to like give them your information, like your ID and everything. It's interesting. The language is also locked to just simplified Chinese. There's no like other languages. Now, instead of having you pay outright for the game, it has a pretty interesting marketplace, not like the marketplace we have nowadays in Minecraft, but like a different type of marketplace with like two different currencies. They're called emeralds and diamonds. And you can actually earn credits by watching daily advertisements, and then you can get like cosmetics and stuff like that. And then they do have like a VIP subscription that's $20 a month that gives like discounts and some extra stuff too. But when it comes to censorship, it's a little interesting here. There is like text censorship pretty heavily in the game. So anything that you could put text in, it could get filtered out if you say a word that the Chinese government might not like. There's not like regular servers like you would see in modern Minecraft, and like you can't name your servers either. They're kind of like a whole specific type of setup. So like the servers have like these really numeric only type of identifications. And of course, you got to be careful. You can't talk about like political topics like Taiwan, Tibet, you know, those type of things. You'll get it filtered out and maybe even in trouble. Who knows? Now, there is some information about it that's a little bit vague. There might be like specific realms that are only available in the Chinese version of Minecraft, like a type of server or something that has a chaos apocalyptic mode. I don't really understand what that means. I think if I understand this, this is kind of just like a regular Minecraft mod that was approved for the China edition of the game, but it has like 4 boss fights and like special achievements. In 2023, they also started releasing these event modes that feature cosmetics and game modes that are limited time, and they were updated pretty regularly, and they seem like they are curated mod packs. Now, how do ratings work in China? Getting a game to market isn't as simple as it is in other countries if you're trying to get your game released in China. Because in China, they have a thing called the National Press and Publication Administration. If you got a game and you want to release to market, whether it's mobile, console, or PC, you have to get the official approval from the NPPA. I know, it's confusing, it's weird. What does that mean? It means that in most cases, if a game wants to be released, it needs to have an official publisher that's already a Chinese company. I think historically speaking, that's made game releases a little easier for certain publishers and developers to actually get their game to market in China. That's why we see NetEase and Tencent do these partnerships all the time. Then when a partnership's established, the game has to be, you know, cleared. So they have to make sure the game follows whatever China's guidelines are. The NPPA will look at the game for content, ideology, social impact. But if the game's approved, it gets something known as an ISBN, which is a license number allowing the game to legally be sold and published in China. Now, we'll go more in detail in a minute after we talk about some games, about some of the criteria, but I want to put this out here first. While China does restrict games all the time from being released in the country, it doesn't necessarily mean that every Chinese player doesn't find workarounds to sometimes play these games, like they use a VPN, which lets them just connect elsewhere. Okay, let's talk about Halo and 343 Industries, or Halo Studios nowadays, to be specific. If you don't know much about Halo, you probably wouldn't know that 343 Industries kind of has a reputation of being like, I don't know, corporate weenies when it comes to censorship in Halo. There's a lot of goofy examples of some censorship decisions that Halo has had, like when the Master Chief Collection was rolling out onto PC and Halo 3 ODST was releasing. There were some police light nameplates inspired by ODST that ended up getting removed by the final release of the game because some guy on Twitter kind of made like a joke about how they were surprised that they were having the police lights as a nameplate in Halo because of all of the protests against law enforcement in 2020 and 2021. So 343 pulled that. They also changed the graffiti in ODST. There was some graffiti that said "You loot, I shoot." They got rid of that. And I don't know if this counts as censorship, but traditionally in Halo, when you killed yourself, you would hear the game say in, you know, the sound. Real quick, yes, we did censor it because YouTube monetization, but you know what I'm talking about. I guess we're just as bad. They did rename that altogether to self-destruction in-game. It always sounded weird to me. They also renamed SWAT to Tactical Slayer. We don't have an official reason why they did that. I can only assume it also had to do with the protests against law enforcement. I don't know. So what would Microsoft do to get Halo in a playable and allowed to be approved state in China? Well, the answer to that question is whatever it took, I guess. We'll talk a little more in depth in this video about some of the rules and regulations that go on with gaming there, but because a game has to be approved by a board, there are some strict guidelines, and getting a game that's typically M-rated, like the original Halo trilogy, approved to get the Master Chief Collection to have a Chinese release over there, it was, you know, a big task, I guess. They changed quite a bit. The Flood, when you kill them, they shrink and disappear. It's like something to do with like dead bodies being an issue. Some of the cutscenes were altered because I guess they were just too grotesque. This one from Halo 2 was interesting, I think. Some of the other ones were altered, different camera angles and whatnot. I mean, these aren't that big of a deal, but it is interesting to look at nonetheless. At the same time, I think the most offensive thing about Chinese MCC isn't really the censorship. It's just the fact that it's pretty much very similar to the launch version of MCC on the Xbox One back in 2014, which was awful. It barely functioned, and it still kind of barely functions. There are some other weird things like fire not showing up on the maw and other little like visual things that are just randomly not working. This is probably just like a rushed out version of the game, honestly, which makes you wonder, why did they try so hard with this? I don't know if the Xbox One sold well in China. It definitely didn't sell well here, so I doubt it sold well there. So I don't know how MCC ended up doing. Also, ODST, they did add it in an update, but it just crashes the game if you try to load it. So they didn't even try to fix that. So what a weird case of Chinese censorship when it comes to Halo the Master Chief Collection. Also, on the topic of Halo, I came across this interesting article from 2013. Apparently in China, there's a program called New Defense Observation, which is hosted by a professor at the PLA National Defense University, who's a part of the Chinese military and is listed as a military questions expert. It's also a show sponsored by the government. And in the show, they were talking about US military tech, and they were comparing it to the Iron Man suits from Iron Man 3. But they say like here, like movie image in Chinese, right? But they're talking about like military concept armor. And they're saying things like, if this armor was made for units or small groups, it could be done, but it would be expensive for mass rollouts. It's unknown how effective armor would be in combat in protecting soldiers. We'll have to wait and see. And you might have noticed while I was reading the, you know, transcribed voiceover from the show, Master Chief is shown here briefly. I don't know what they think is going on in America and what the military has. I don't think Master Chief armor is quite there in 2013. Also, this wasn't even an official Master Chief. This was like a fan project by like the Halo prop community. So I don't know, just a goofy thing that I found in the process of doing research for this video. There's a little game called I.G.I 2. It was a 2003 tactical shooter that actually did end up releasing in China. Now, this game has this whole plot line where you're a British SAS operator trying to stop this like, you know, global scheme. It's essentially the Chinese trying to do some stuff with an EMP, but a lot of it is kind of like the Russian mafia in the plot line for the first part of the game. But they managed to get past Chinese censorship, at least initially. The Chinese government department that does the inspection did inspect the game, but the development team, Interloop Studios, actually sent them an unfinished version of the game to get pre-approval. And in that unfinished version, the last 6 levels of the game were not included. Conveniently enough, the 6 levels that involve China being the main antagonistic force of the game. So the game did end up releasing in China. It was on sale for about 6 months, and then it ended up getting banned when China caught wind of what was actually in the game. Apparently, it was banned for intentionally blackening China in the Chinese army's image. Honestly, I'd never heard of this game before this specific video, so hey, they got a piece of history in gaming by this little maneuver that they did. Whatever happened to Development Studio? Let's see.
They closed in 2003.
They closed 2 years before the game got banned.
Oh, damn, dude. I guess they never reaped the fruits of the profit.
Oh, maybe they got 1 year before they got banned. Okay. They still got shut down immediately after the game came out. Okay. Oh,
so
okay.
we should buy the rights to I.G.I.
2 Covert Strike.
Yeah, just the whole franchise. We'll just relaunch it.
Yeah. I'm down for it. I know we said that we were going to come back and talk about some of the criteria, and I think now is a good time now that we've gotten a couple of game, examples under our belt. So what exactly are the big no-nos of the Chinese government in gaming? Number 1, no political themes, or at least no political themes if it's critical of China or mentions Tiananmen Square, pro-democracy type content. Better not mock the government or leadership. That is like an automatic ban. Some of the more goofy ones, though, that are often also censored, things with religious elements seem to be a big problem point for China. China doesn't have like a typical rating system like the ESRB where they age rate different games. It's kind of like a pass-fail type thing. So everything has to be, you know, tame enough, I guess. So like supernatural things, religious symbolism, those could be big red flags. But even things like skeletons and other things you wouldn't think do fall into that. Then blood and gore. Even if the blood isn't red, it can still get banned. Though I do think recoloring blood helps in some cases. And then like any type of dismemberment, not okay. Scantily clad content or revealing outfits. Anything that could be deemed, you know, a little too hot for China, it can get banned if it's like overly seductive or whatever. Gambling and or drugs. The two things that go hand in hand at the Rocket Sloth offices. Cut that line. Actually, don't cut that line. We're putting it in. For the record, I am joking. I'm spiraling here. This isn't good. Dark themes or nihilism. If a game is too depressing, apparently can also get banned. I feel like that's a very vague thing. And God forbid you make Taiwan, Hong Kong, or Tibet their own countries. That's an immediate ban. So, some strict guidelines to follow, but guidelines nonetheless that some games have attempted to follow and avoid getting banned. And it gets interesting. Let's talk about Call of Duty. Now, one of Activision's development studios that works directly on Call of Duty nowadays is Activision Shanghai. They've been cooking up the main Call of Duty games for a couple of years now, but before that, they worked on Call of Duty Online, which was essentially a free-to-play, computer-only version of Call of Duty exclusively released in China. It was also published by Tencent. Now, I remember seeing this when I was a teenager, like when it came out, and I was thinking this was the coolest thing ever because it took maps from cool Call of Duty games like Modern Warfare 2 and Black Ops and weapons from multiple different Call of Duty games and kind of made this ultimate Call of Duty experience. You could be playing on Nuketown, and then you could be playing on, I don't know, Dome from Modern Warfare 3. It was cool. It was like all the Call of Duties at the time that were good, kind of bundled up in one. Not a lot of World at War representation, though. That was sad. But of course, it was only available in China, unless you had like some VPN back in the early 2010s, which wasn't as common as it is nowadays. And even then, ping would have been, rough. Now, while this game was free, it did have microtransactions. It did have some other aspects to the game that were rather unique. But I think by far the most interesting thing was what they did with zombies, because zombies are a popular game mode from Call of Duty, but you know how China is about having like the undead. So what was the workaround for having a zombies mode without having zombies? Well, they replaced the zombies with cyborgs. I don't know. This actually looks pretty incredible for a zombies type mode, even if it's not zombies, they're just cyborgs instead. Man, I wish we got some of this content here in the West because I feel like this could have been fun to play. I haven't played it, so I don't actually know. Some people out there have been able to get it working and have played it, and it seemed like it was kind of a cool experience, a cool spin on zombies. I mean, there was a lot of original content specifically for this mode, so yeah, it would have been cool. Now, unfortunately for Call of Duty Online, it did end up shutting down in 2021, and it's likely because of the popularity of Call of Duty Mobile, and nowadays just regular Call of Duty is regularly available in China, so they don't have to have like a special Call of Duty Online version only. But that's not the only time that Call of Duty's kind of tailored something specifically for China, because in Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, when they rolled out those trailers initially kind of showing the whole like know your history promotional angle that they did, during the trailer there was 1 second of screen time that showed the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests that happened in Beijing, that infamous like Tank Man moment. And this is like a no-go in China, like you can't do this. I don't think the government actually stepped in directly. It seemed like the social media platforms, Weibo and Bilibili, kind of took a proactive approach to avoid the government like necessarily directly making them do things. I think that's kind of the way that things work a lot of the times. Like some of the websites will proactively make decisions and take content down to avoid getting in trouble with the Chinese government. So the trailer was banned in China within like 24 hours of it releasing. So this ended up resulting in the trailer getting removed, censored, and later on it would be re-uploaded and reposted with the Tiananmen Square clip removed entirely. Even in the versions of the trailer for the game that weren't in China, they ended up getting censored and later re-uploads. There was never like an official explanation from Activision or an official like Chinese statement about it. But yeah, wild times. I do think it's worth noting though that Call of Duty Cold War never did see a release in mainland stores in China, but Call of Duty Mobile was still a pretty big thing over there. I mean, Activision Blizzard's done a couple of goofy things to try to appease the Chinese government. Like like this isn't the first time they've done it. Back in 2019, there was a lot of Hearthstone controversy. A user by the name Blitzchung, who is a Hong Kong pro player, said, "Liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our times," during an official Hearthstone Grandmasters stream. The results of this were wild. Blizzard cut the stream, disqualified him, banned him for a year, and apparently stripped him of $10,000 in winnings. And I guess some other streamers who also supported him were penalized as well. This caused like a ton of boycotts. Some Blizzard employees like did walkouts. It was like a big whole thing. The player did get his ban lowered to 6 months, and his prize money did get reinstated, saying that it was like policy enforcement, not censorship. But I don't know. Now we do know that some of Hearthstone's art has been like censored for the Chinese markets already. So, you know, it's no real surprise what's happening here, but man, it's wild. Just some of the controversies that's come out of Activision directly.
Before Activision Blizzard became one company though, Blizzard would launch World of Warcraft in mainland China in June of 2005 under a partnership with a company called The Nine. This quickly became a massive success, boosting this company's profits by over 2,000% in just a few months. Because of this massive success though, there was immediate attention drawn by the Chinese regulators, and they were very concerned about World of Warcraft addictions and the spiritual pollution that this game might cause, which then in 2006 led to a gaming timer mechanism being introduced. And I think the way this worked was that after 3 hours of play you would gain less XP, and after 5 hours you would gain like 0 XP, so you weren't able to make any progress in the game, and you had to go offline for 5 hours in order for this to reset. But I mean, obviously players would just make multiple accounts to get around this, so like, I don't know, this didn't really have any effect. But when Burning Crusade was announced in 2007, the company that ran World of Warcraft in China, that it was time for some more censorship so that the game wouldn't draw any unwanted attention once again. So they would alter the Forsaken character models, they covered exposed bones, and they even took out the tombstone that was left behind when you die in World of Warcraft. And because they decided to make these changes, Burning Crusade was actually delayed by 9 months in China. And then when the second expansion was announced, it got even worse, because now the whole thing is about like a skeleton king and stuff like that, which is a big no-no. And on top of that, during this time, NetEase was taking over publishing rights of World of Warcraft. So while they were working on getting Wrath of the Lich King approved, there was a bunch of issues because of the transfer between the companies, and there was downtime for players even where they couldn't play the game. And all this led to an 18 months delay for Wrath of the Lich King. And this add-on had some crazy censorship. Anything that looked like a bone or a skull would be changed. Enemies like Sintragosa were remodeled into like just being a regular blue dragon instead of being like a skeletal dragon. Zombie-looking characters had to be severely changed, obviously. And the winged steed of Ebon Blade mount even had to be covered up and just became like a normal griffin instead of like the cool-looking skeletal griffin. And I mean, this would just continue for all the other WoW expansions. Every time there was like a skeleton or a zombie or something like that, they would just censor it and change it. In 2023, China also implemented some more anti-addiction policies, and this prohibited minors from playing more than 1 hour of online games on weekdays and not more than 2 hours on a weekend, which obviously affected all the younger people playing World of Warcraft in China. And in the same year, there was some issues with the licensing between Blizzard and NetEase. NetEase demanded for the game's source code, which Blizzard feared would allow NetEase to operate the game independently, away from their control, and they could not come to an understanding. So because of that, World of Warcraft in China just straight up shut down and was gone. Until in April 2024, they announced that they did renew their partnership and that the game would be coming back in August. But according to NetEase, they did receive greater autonomy and more decision-making authority over the game. So I guess Activision Blizzard didn't want to keep losing out on that Chinese World of Warcraft revenue, and they changed their mind. And one of the first things that NetEase did, now that they had more power, was to implement this bounty system that was there to combat cheating. And basically, they would give out rewards for people that would report cheaters, and if these cheaters get banned, you would get a reward for reporting them. This would go as far as like if you had real-life evidence on the hack creators and the sellers and the distributors, and you would cooperate with the police on it, you could get up to 14,000 US dollars, which is crazy. Obviously, this isn't quite surprising because China does have a strict law on distributing and creating and using hacks that can even lead to jail time, which honestly sounds kind of fire. I wish the cheaters in my Rainbow Six Siege lobbies would go to jail.
Now, if you know anything about China, you might know already that China has outright banned Winnie the Pooh. It actually dates all the way back to some memes from like 2013, 2015, where people online were comparing Chinese President Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh. You've probably seen the memes back in the day of it. The Chinese government didn't appreciate this, and Winnie the Pooh outright has been banned in all forms of media. You probably have seen South Park meme on it before. There was like a Winnie the Pooh movie, Christopher Robin, I think it was called. That got banned from release in China. There's been like this big anti-Winnie the Pooh thing going on with China. So what happens when a game like Kingdom Hearts 3 has a Winnie the Pooh 100-acre woods section in the game? Well, it gets a little interesting here because the information I found is a little bit hard to tell. So I wanted to dig into this a little bit. Luke, I'm going to send you images of what seems to be what a lot of people reported on being how Winnie the Pooh appears in Kingdom Hearts 3 in the Chinese version of the game.
Also unrelated, do you think that the Winnie the Pooh horror movie was banned in China as well?
I don't know if that released there.
It should have been banned here as well, actually.
So it was heavily reported that this is how Winnie the Pooh appears in the Chinese version of Kingdom Hearts 3.
Oh.
And this was like talked about. There was YouTube videos made, media outlets, spread it around a bit too. I think there was a bit of false information because I tried to find gameplay footage directly to compare this to, and I couldn't find any gameplay footage with it looking like this. What I believe happened was when the game was getting reveal trailers, different Chinese video game media outlets were reporting on the trailers and didn't want to get in trouble with the Chinese government for showing screenshots of a game that featured Winnie the Pooh. So they airbrushed the character out and then published things online. Then other people were like, look, this is the trailer. This is the Chinese version. It's a little bit wild. I think this would be hilarious. So then I decided to do some more digging, and I found a video, finally, of the Kingdom Hearts 3 Chinese version, right? And in the video, let's play the clip on the screen.
What? What?
Bowser. Now here's the thing. I'm pretty sure the video is fake. I'm pretty sure this is like a meme. The YouTuber modded it in maybe and just doubled down on it as like a joke, which I think is pretty funny. At first I did think this was real. I'm glad I did some due diligence to try to verify that Bowser is in fact not in the game. So then I did more digging, and it turns out there's not a Chinese version of Kingdom Hearts 3 at all. There is censorship that we're talking about here. This does count as censorship because I think the Chinese game outlets that were reporting on the game releasing globally censored it. So there was still some level of Chinese government influencing the decision to censor media, but I don't think the game actually had a release. So Winnie the Pooh was not just a glowing white orb, or Bowser in a Chinese version of Kingdom Hearts 3 we never got here in the West. Unless I'm wrong and there's some Chinese version out there and I'm missing something, because I did try to figure it out. I was so sure with all the outlets. I mean, it wasn't just a few outlets. There was a lot of outlets. Look on the screen. Look at all these news articles reporting on Kingdom Hearts 3, Winnie the Pooh in China. Wild route here.
So since you just mentioned South Park, there's actually something interesting about South Park. Both South Park games released in China, and in 2019, you did kind of reference this. South Park made a episode that is kind of notorious now, making fun of Chinese censorship. And after that, China banned South Park from all streaming services, all its social medias, from sale, etc., etc. And then with that, all the South Park games were banned as well. Life is Strange released in 2021, and in the game you can see this flag right here, and that caused a huge outrage from Chinese players. And even to this day, the game still regularly gets some negative reviews about this flag. Now, what's so controversial about this flag to Chinese gamers? Well, there's some explaining I have to do, like some historic stuff. Basically, in the early 1900s, the last Chinese dynasty ended, and Tibet became its own independent country for 40 years. Then in 1950, China invaded it and annexed it. And since then, it's been considered a part of China, or like a sub-region or autonomous region of China. And in China, symbols that, reference Tibet's independence are banned, like their flag. And for years, there has been a struggle of the people of Tibet trying to reclaim their independence. So when Life is Strange showed the Tibet flag in the game and in promotional materials, Chinese players got upset, I guess. There was literally thousands and thousands of bad reviews, all complaining about the inclusion of this flag and how dare they do this political statement. And the initial response from the developer was that they would unlist the game in China and block reviews from that region, which it seems like they went back on, and that caused even more people to get upset about it. So I guess they shot themselves in the foot with them on but I mean, yeah, I don't know. People were just really upset about this flag. And that wasn't the only thing they were actually upset with this game. Some of the reviews that I read actually talk about the inclusion of the number 731 in an achievement, which some people think is a reference to Unit 731, which was a Japanese research facility. I mean, I don't know if that's the best word, that was established in China, where they researched like biological weapons, and they did a bunch of human experiments, and they murdered thousands of Chinese people, basically. If that is actually what the inclusion of the number 731 in this achievement would reference, but I don't think it does. I just think it's a coincidence that the numbers played out that way, and the achievement is just about guessing the right number of jelly beans in a jar on some side quest. But anyways, the main complaint was the Tibet flag, and to this day, you know, as I mentioned earlier, there's still reviews about this popping up every couple weeks on Steam.
Let's talk about Rainbow Six Siege, because the backlash that this little decision announcement that Ubisoft made to get fans prepared for a Chinese launch of Rainbow Six Siege was pretty big, enough where Ubisoft ended up flipping their decision. But let's go back to 2018, when Ubisoft updated their blog to talk about the future of Rainbow Six Siege and talked about how they were planning to gear things up for a Chinese launch of the game. But in the process of launching the game in China, they would be making some changes to maps and art directions in various locations of the game to comply with China's strict guidelines on video game content. They went on to say that the reason that they were going to be changing the main version of the game that was available to the West was because it would be too much work to fork into two different versions of the game to update those games. So if they were more closely designed similarly, they could be faster in development. Okay, so what are they going to change, right? Well, they showed examples and it was kind of goofy. Environmental blood? No good. They showed a before and after of like a painting that had a blood splatter on it. No longer there. References to gambling? No way. Clubhouse had some slot machines. Those were taken out. Also, skulls are banned in China. So there's some graffiti in Clubhouse also, and they were going to change it. It looked 10 times worse. They were going to change some of the icons that show up, like death icons and melee icons. But the one that took things way too far was the changes they were going to make to the little strip club in Clubhouse. They were going to change a little neon light from this to this, and that wasn't acceptable. And Rainbow Six fans protested hard. And by protested hard, they like talked about it on their subreddit. The goofy thing about this is while they were like, we need the games to be, you know, similar so that we can develop things specifically and quickly, that wasn't actually still going to change things, because they were still going to fork the versions of the game, and China was going to have its own version of the game with still some other differences that weren't as extreme. So they were just like doing it for the sake of doing it, maybe, or I mean, not obviously, but it just didn't make sense. Why are they going to make the versions have parity if there's already going to be a Chinese specific version of the game released in China anyways? So it wasn't long. It was about 3 weeks after this announcement that Ubisoft announced it would be reverting its proposed aesthetic changes, and they chose not to go on with it. And ultimately, a Chinese specific release of Rainbow Six Siege actually wouldn't happen until way later, or actually it's still in the process of releasing. It's a little hard for me to figure out exactly how this works. Late last year, the game got approved along with Rainbow Six Mobile, another Rainbow Six project that seems to be taking forever, meaning that it was in compliance to release in China whenever Ubisoft partnered with Tencent were ready to get that game out there. There's not much to go off of as far as what's actually in the gameplay build and how censorship affects that version of the game, which is something I'd be curious to see now, just knowing how close we were to getting the censorship in the main global version of the game. It's not like Chinese players haven't been able to play Rainbow Six Siege, just playing a different version, not a mainland China release of the game, but nonetheless, this version's now set to release soon. I do suspect, though, we can see some of the censorship design choices reflected in Rainbow Six Mobile from what's available. The game is in like alpha in Canada, so there's gameplay footage out there pretty regularly, and you can see that a lot of the operators have new designs, and operators like Cavera, whatever, like the skull paint on her face has been like reduced quite a bit, I think. And I'm sure that these types of design choices are going to carry over even more so in the mainline game when it does release over there. During the whole process of this, I was trying to find footage because from what I researched online, it seemed like there might be a closed beta going on or something. So there should be gameplay footage out there of the Chinese version. And while I was looking, I went to this like video sharing site from China called like Bilby. Maybe it's called Billy. And I found this video and I had no idea what I was watching. I was trying to get gameplay footage from Clubhouse, and I came across this. So I don't know what this is. I think it's just a mod or something, maybe. But if this is actually from the Chinese version of the game, we're missing out here. I don't know what this is.
When PUBG released in 2017, it became hugely popular, and 1 year later, a mobile version would release that would also be very popular, if not even more popular. And PUBG Mobile wanted to capture the Chinese market as well, so they submitted the game for review in 2018. But in the same year, the Chinese government actually put a freeze on new approvals of video games. And PUBG Mobile was initially supposed to be published by Tencent in China. Jumping to 2019 though, Tencent was like, well actually, we're not gonna publish PUBG Mobile anymore, we're gonna make a new version of the game, an altered version of the game, a better version of the game, aka a version that is more in line with the Chinese regulations. And this new version of PUBG Mobile would be named Game for Peace. And this game actually makes sense for this version because they changed the whole theme of the game. The game is now presented as a virtual military training exercise against counterterrorism. And with that, the game is now emphasizing peace, hence the name Game for Peace. This angle kind of provides a justification to why there's so much toned down violence in the game. These gameplay changes were things like blood being removed or explosions being made smaller, but would also affect things like death animations. In the Chinese version, if a player dies, he waves goodbye and then just disconnects. Yes, actually just waves goodbye and disconnects, because, you know, once again, it's a simulation, so they're not dead, they're just disconnected. Which also the lingo in the game was changed. You didn't get killed, you were just out. And there was like many small changes like this to make the game seem more peaceful. And even after all these changes to make the game more peaceful, Tencent was like, this is not enough to get it approved, and they doubled down with some patriotic propaganda. They would call this game a direct tribute to the blue sky warriors that guard China's airspace, which is the People's Liberation Army's Air Force. And with all that, the game actually got approved and released in China. The game would get many updates over the years, and eventually they would change the name to Peacekeeper Elite, because I guess Game for Peace wasn't on the nose enough, and now it's like, you are playing the elite peacekeepers. But nonetheless, this version of PUBG was a massive financial and commercial success, generating $14 million within the first 3 days on iOS alone. And it would regularly outperform the global version of PUBG Mobile in revenue, and sometimes even Fortnite. And actually, when researching this, I also looked at the Indian PUBG Mobile version, and in some parts, it's actually even more censored than the Chinese version.
Do you guys remember that really old game called Battlefield 4? This game originally released in 2013, and despite the fact that the game itself wasn't set up for a release in China, it still ended up getting banned in China. So I guess they set it up so like Chinese players wouldn't have access to playing the game. It's a little confusing to figure out how that works. I guess the game wasn't set up for like a digital release in China, but I guess there was like import sales, and these ended up getting banned as well. You see, after Battlefield 4 released, there was a DLC, the first DLC for the game, called China Rising, which was set on the Chinese mainland. It had some new maps that were based in China. I think it really has to mostly do with the title of the game. Now, like I said, the game wasn't for sale in China to begin with. It was just something that people could access who lived there and wanted to, get foreign games. But after a DLC called China Rising released, that got shut down. China's Ministry of Culture ended up putting a formal ban on Battlefield 4, and the Ministry of Culture made a statement saying that the game encompasses elements that affect national security. According to the translation done by Kotaku, they also went on to say that the content of DICE's game slanders the good image of the People's Liberation Army. The scenario of Admiral Zhang and his renegade general is particularly wrong. It is hard for many Chinese players to accept it. This one's always been interesting to me because of the fact that the game is a multiplayer focused game. Like the DLC was all multiplayer. The single player came out with base Battlefield 4, and China didn't really notice at the time, I guess. Maybe because the game wasn't obviously explicitly for sale there, but it also took place in the future at the time. It was like an alternate timeline. Like it wasn't real world stuff or based on anything that was real, but nonetheless, it still got banned. So RIP Battlefield 4. EA never actually made a statement in regards to this. They kind of just ignored it. Honestly, it was probably just more press. Like any press is good press for a game like Battlefield 4. I don't think it really affected anything. Okay, we gotta talk about the game called Devotion. It's a Taiwanese horror game. So you can already see what's probably happening here, but it gets more specific and, I don't know, kind of funny. In this horror game, there's a secret hidden Easter egg of Chinese President Xi Jinping, kind of looking like Winnie the Pooh. They even have text that kind of translates roughly to Xi Jinping, Winnie the Pooh, and they maybe imply that he's a moron. The game ended up releasing in 2019. When this was discovered, the developer said it was a placeholder accidentally left in the game. Please don't assassinate us. Interestingly enough, though, the game then got review bombed by Chinese players, and the game ended up getting removed globally shortly after that, and the developers addressed the issue.
You know, I found it interesting. I talked about the review bombing in the Life of the Strange section, but like, there's a lot of people who think it's like bots.
Could be. I mean, it very well could be. What's interesting is that the game, since it was releasing in China also, did have a Chinese publisher, and they ended up getting penalized because of this, and they had their business license revoked, which is pretty big. So the game ended up being permanently banned, even with fixes and whatnot. It was not okay for the game, and they did self-release outside of China, but not in China.
League of Legends is also a massive game in China, with there being over 70 million monthly players in China alone. And with that being a huge market, League of Legends and Riot Games, they have to make sure they can have their games up and running there. And the changes they had to make over the years range from like champion visual redesigns to banning words being typed in chat. To give some examples, champions like Vladimir, who usually like suck blood, it's like a vampire character, you know? In the Chinese version, the blood has like this weird black purple color, and just overall turn down a little bit of the gore and violence in League of Legends, which honestly is not that violent of a game. It's really cartoony. But it doesn't stop there. They had to change most of the splash arts, like the main art that each character has for the Chinese version. They would have to cover up faces of like characters that look like skeleton, like Karthus. Characters that were a little effeminate, like in League of Legends, like Taric, had to be redesigned and, you know, had to be given like a more masculine like style, because, you know, you can't show effeminate men, I guess. But on the flip side, you know, a lot of female covers like Jing had to be covered up. But I do have to be fair and mention that over the years, I've heard so many people say that the Chinese art is better, and, you know, people were making memes and, you know, jokes about it. And I do have to say, in some cases, it is actually better than the Western version. But I mean, some of the censorship is just kind of dumb. The art just looks cool. But a lot of this was like pre-2015, when Riot Games was still an independent company. And then in 2015, they got bought by Tencent, which is one of the biggest Chinese video game companies. And in some cases, the censorship or these changes wouldn't just be visual anymore, they would actually expand into other things, like social issues. Like Kei was the first openly gay black champion in League of Legends, and they did alter this in the lore for countries like China, making it less obvious that he is gay. And they had to do similar changes for Arcane, like the Netflix TV show, in order for it to release in China, which obviously, once again, they want to have released there because China is their biggest market. There's no surprise that this is happening and that Tencent is really trying to make this game viable for the Chinese market.
Animal Crossing, surprisingly, was an interesting game. Now, Animal Crossing never had an official Chinese release, so it is worth noting here when it comes to Animal Crossing New Horizons. But in 2020, when all the pandemic lockdowns were going, people weren't able to go out and protest, specifically in Hong Kong. Players started using Animal Crossing, and they made like virtual vigils and protests and had signs and all different types of things. And while the game wasn't officially released in stores, one of the popular websites where people would go and buy Animal Crossing and get it imported or whatever, Taobao and Pinduoduo, ended up blocking all searches for Animal Crossing after all of these like protests kind of like picked up steam and news outlets were like reporting on it happening. So while this wasn't, once again, an official influence causing the game to be banned even more or blocked even more, even though it wasn't, you know, set to officially release, it was kind of like an unofficial preemptive strike against Animal Crossing New Horizons to stop people from digitally protesting China just like taking over Hong Kong. There was an older game back in 2002 banned called Hearts of Iron. It was banned because it depicted disputed territories such as Tibet, Manchuria, and Xinjiang as independent nations, and because the island of Taiwan is shown to be under Japanese control. Uh-oh.
Oh, can't have that.
Command and Conquer Generals was a kind of a big deal when that happened too. It was banned for smearing the image of China and Chinese army, even though the game presents China as a protagonist and glorifies the People's Liberation Army. But apparently in the Chinese campaign, the player destroys targets like Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Center to snuff out some terrorists and the Three Gorges Dam.
So I guess I didn't like that they're in the game you can destroy these Chinese like landmarks, and I guess that outweighs the free advertisement they would have gotten for the Liberation Army.
There might have also been game destruction of sites like the Tiananmen Square. And apparently, like, while they are kind of the protagonists, they're also kind of framed in like a pretty aggressive manner. So I don't know. It got banned. Did you know that Paladins is banned in China also?
I did not, but that kind of, you know, is a pro for living in China.
You really hate that game, don't you? I liked it. I don't know. It's apparently banned for containing overly revealing female characters, blood, gore, and vulgar content. Overwatch isn't banned, by the way. So I guess Paladins wasn't on top of things. It's Activision Blizzard. They got those Chinese ties down.
Steam recently entered the Chinese market with an official Steam launch in partnership with Perfect World in 2021. This version of Steam is quite different than our version of Steam. There is like these mandatory health gaming advisories. The user profiles are just the Steam ID numbers. You can't like upload a profile picture or change your name, and all your information goes through a Chinese agency. And of course, there's strict time limits for minors, which are heavily enforced. And while there is an official Chinese Steam version now, in the past, Valve as a development studio has released Chinese versions of some of their most popular games in China, most notably Dota 2 and Counter-Strike Global Offensive. If you listen to the League of Legends section, you might know that MOBAs are usually popular in China, so obviously Valve wanted to enter that market too with Dota 2. So in partnership with Perfect World, which, you know, again is the same company that would launch the official Steam client with, they would develop a low violence version of Dota 2, which reskinned a number of heroes, creeps, and items. Most of these changes just involved like covering up certain body parts and stuff like that, but the character Skeleton King was actually fundamentally changed and redesigned because, you know, he's a skeleton and skeletons and skulls are big no-nos in China. So they renamed him to Wraith King, and, you know, they covered up his bones and they transformed him into like this, I don't know, monarch looking guy. I don't even know. But what's interesting about this is that this change wasn't solely for China. Valve also faced potential copyright issues with Blizzard over this character, as the character Leoric from Diablo is also known as the Skeleton King, and Blizzard is known to be quite protective of their intellectual properties. So they were like, we have the option to kill 2 flies with 1 fly swatter here, and they changed the Skeleton King to the Wraith King in the Western version as well, which probably also made developing skins and stuff for this character easier because you didn't have 2 separate models. Now when it comes to Counter-Strike Global Offensive, they didn't change any characters, but they did overhaul the game visually extensively. Just like Cash had the Soviet symbols removed, skulls throughout the game were removed from stickers or like even Operation logos like Operation Bloodhound's logo. Arabic inscriptions were removed or replaced on maps like Dust 2 and Mirage. And music pack covers and achievement icons had to be changed because some of them had skeletal imagery, so they would often replace it with like gas masks or crosshairs. Like, it's almost comically the way they did it. Look at the crown sticker right here, you know, like a little skeleton head with a crown on it, and then boom, Chinese version, a gas mask with a crown on. But hey, both these games were able to be officially released in China.
Now let's talk about a goofy game that got banned in China. Football Manager 2005. Who would have thought a game like this would be so controversial? Well, as it turns out, Sega, who published the game, did a little thing with their games that China wasn't too happy about. You see, in the game, they took Tibet and Taiwan and included them as separate countries from China. Oh my god, I can't believe they did it. If you know anything about the geopolitical state of China, you know that that is a no-no. What's interesting, though, is China outright banned the game. They stated that its content harmful to China's sovereignty and territorial integrity that seriously violates Chinese law and has been strongly protested by our nation's gamers. I don't know really what that means, but Sega's response was interesting to say the least. You see, Sega released a statement saying that the Chinese version of the game, drumroll please, actually had Taiwan and Tibet included as a part of China for the release that would be coming to China for this game. As it turned out, the versions of the game that had Taiwan and Tibet as different countries were from like the rest of the game releases globally and not the Chinese translated version of the game. This version of the game that they got in China that got the game banned wasn't supposed to release in China, and it likely was released by underground importers or a downloaded game. It could have been sold illegally in software shops in China as well. It also seems like Sega did submit a modified version of the game removing those references. Also, apparently some other places were listed as separate countries like Hong Kong and Macau, which also went against China's integrity rules or whatever. Nonetheless, it never ended up getting reinstated, at least officially. I didn't know this, but there's 2 pretty massive games that are banned in China as well. Games that I thought wouldn't be banned, but Roblox. This game got banned. There's only a few countries that has Roblox banned. North Korea, China, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Guatemala, and Oman. Now, the thing about China is I think the fact that Roblox is kind of more than just a game. It's kind of like a social media platform, and China does have like a strict ban on certain social media platforms. I think Roblox falls into this. But technically, according to this Wikipedia page, the reason for Roblox's ban is that it's banned for anti-communist propaganda. Roblox. Look at them go. After Roblox got banned, Roblox didn't quite give up. They actually went the Minecraft route, and they partnered up with Tencent to try to get a version of Roblox back out on the market. So, rebranded, kind of like what PUBG had to do. We have Luobu, which is essentially Roblox China with a different name, so they could get around the ban. It had heavy censorship, and it was supposed to be like a system that would like only have curated content, so it couldn't just be like full on anyone can make stuff, because then, you know, it leaves the game more likely to get banned.
Can't have all that freedom, dude. People creating? No.
Yeah, apparently Roblox players outside of mainland China, if they attempt to join the server, would get an error code, but like there was still like some connectivity where they could at least see that there was an error code. It is interesting, though, that this version of the game existed. There were some events that happened that were exclusive to the Chinese version, but interestingly enough, despite the fact that it was launched and existed for a little while, it officially ended up shutting down in December of 2021. They said that there was more transitional things that would have had to happen for the game to continue to be supported, but it was kind of alluded in the shutdown thank you message that it would be coming back sometime in the future, except it never actually came back. A spokesperson confirmed that 15 jobs were lost, which isn't really that many, considering that the speculated headcount at the Roblox Chinese department is over 100 people, maybe as many as 500, but likely the lower end of that. And there's speculation is going to come back sometime in the future still. People are holding out hope. The reason why there's still hope that it's coming back is apparently the Roblox team continued posting content on the Chinese Bilibili channel, at least as of December of 2024. Another game banned in China, Fortnite. They got also, dude.
And it used to be called Fortress Night there. The matches were shorter, and there was multiple people who could claim a battle royale victory.
Participation medal.
And then also the storm didn't damage your health bar. There was like a storm damage bar.
What was the point of the storm?
This version launched in 2018 and they shut it down in 2021. And people speculate it's because of all those like child safety regulations they implemented. And I guess they identified Fortress Night as a big issue, and too many damn kids on that game.
It seems like there was kind of like a wave of a lot of games kind of getting banned or getting quote unquote corrective action made. RIP Fortress Night.
Resident Evil is another series that never really made it into China, and it's no surprise that it's because of its depictions of violence and gore and, you know, dead bodies, skeletons, zombies, etc., etc. And especially going back to the earlier Resident Evil games, none of them ever really made it to China. And the modern Resident Evil games also run into a ton of issues in China, like the Resident Evil 2 remake is officially banned in mainland China. And the demo for the Resident Evil 3 remake caused some stir up when Chinese gamers found out that there's a safe pass code with the numbers 918, which I saw as a reference to when Japan invaded them in September 18th, 1931, which like started the whole Japanese-Chinese war and, you know, led into World War II. But like, I don't know, it's probably just random numbers. It's probably just a coincidence. I don't think they specifically picked the numbers 918 to reference this invasion. And while these games are officially banned, there also is a gray market, and there are some platforms and vendors that will sell these games. And for the recent remakes, you can actually find some funny like altered artworks that are like hand-drawn that they upload to the site to get around like the automatic image detection, I guess, so they can sell these games. There definitely is a market for Resident Evil games in China, and Capcom themselves are aware of this, and they adopted the strategy of releasing like newer games like 7 Village and Resident Evil 4 Remake most recently in Chinese-speaking territories that are not mainland China, so then there would be an official Chinese version of the games. You remember that global health crisis from a couple years ago? I don't know if we can say the name, that big one from 2020.
Why does YouTube potentially demonetize people for saying that word?
I don't know, too many conspiracy theories. But there was a game that blew up in China because of it, and that was Plague Inc. Now, this became the best-selling app on the App Store overnight, and because of that, I guess, you know, the government looked at it again and they decided to ban it from the App Store. Then the developer was like, why did we get shut down? And they never got an answer. And there's like some small indie studio, I guess they never found out why they actually got banned. But some people also speculate that there was a new scenario added shortly before the 2020 health crisis, and that one included fake news as one of the scenarios. And that's another thing that you can't talk about in China. It lasted a little longer on Steam, eventually was removed there too.
Well, anyways, I feel pretty good about this list. If you know of any censorship in games that you think is interesting that we should talk about, let us know. I wonder, this is the second video we've done on this because we did censorship outside of China as a previous video a couple weeks ago. So check that out if you haven't seen it. But I do wonder if we maybe should hit it one more time and do like a censorship video in Germany with how much Germany has had censored over the years and your experience growing up in Germany. If you guys would like to see that, let us know in the comments. That's probably the best way to let us know. Maybe we'll revisit it. But otherwise, thanks so much for watching. If you're new, subscribe. That'd be cool. Huge shout out to our patrons and YouTube members. Throwing a few bucks our way helps us make these videos. There's 2 of us here working on this channel, so every dollar helps. Okay, that's it. That's enough shilling. We'll see you guys all next time with a new video. Bye, guys.